email. He always refers to it as DOT, Public Works.
Oh, yes.
It's like,
But this is, I
See
have,
the latest, it was late this afternoon that came.
I haven't, I've been on the road, so I haven't been able to check, I haven't been checking emails. It was, today at 3:38, it says it was sent.
Saying he was happy with the repaving of the rumble strips in front of, essentially in front of his house.
we're not done yet, though.
Well, that was his point. is,
Okay, thanks.
we gotta continue doing what, so you were copied on it as well.
So is this all that's stop signs in the town and yield signs? Is that what this is?
can get started anyway. All set? So I'll call the meeting to order. It's just a little past 7. We have the minutes from September 4th, 2018 to approve if we wish. Is there a motion?
So moved?
I'll second.
Second. Page 1.
One thing on page 1 under item number 3, and if the answer is no, we shouldn't add anything, that's totally fine, but if I remember correctly, when Mr. Need, did I get his name right?
Eddie.
Nettie came in and spoke with us, I believe he mentioned a tenant or landowner on Hurricane Lane who may complain, and I just wonder if that should be added.
We don't know who it would be.
Right, we don't know.
It's all speculation, so.
I just thought he remembered, I remember there was a specific concern he had about a complaint.
Well, his concern is that at some point in time down the road, something might happen, and it might, but.
Right, okay. All right, if you don't want to add anything, that's fine. It's just, it's something I recollected and wondered if it should be added.
Anything else on page 1? Page 2?
On number 7, was there a motion for approving the chickens regulation, or?
It was not.
It was not, it was just an informal?
It was sort of a straw vote that we
Got
took, and it turned out to be 3-2 at that
Okay,
point.
yep,
Whether there was consensus to continue developing it and
yep, I got it.
not enough support.
I just wondered if we should have documented a motion, so the answer is no. Yep.
Page 3.
So on this one, under discussion, under the North Williston Road traffic calming,
Yes.
so I think I said, this isn't a quote, but what I believe I said is that my preference is to remove all of the rumble strips, but I wouldn't vote against removing some of them. I thought we should remove them all. That was my strong opinion. Vote against removing some. So if you could just reword that first sentence.
Okay. You got that, Rick?
Our clerk. will
Yes,
get it
well,
from
that's
the
true,
camera.
right.
Okay,
Okay.
right? And then, on number 12, Terry,
Yes.
on the policy, it says that I suggested the policy state that the MUTCD guidelines must be followed, but it already says that in the policy, so I'm not sure
It
that
did,
that's,
correct.
I'm not sure that's an accurate quote. I'm not sure, I don't remember saying it quite that way, but it doesn't feel accurate. What I think I've said on the policy so far is I'd like to see us make sure that we protect against what the errors we had with on North Williston Road. But I don't know if the policy actually covers North Williston Road. That's really not a neighborhood, right? And is this policy a traffic calming policy for neighborhoods or generally throughout the town?
For neighborhoods.
That's what I thought. So it doesn't really apply. Okay.
So did you want just to strike that?
If you don't mind, I just don't think it makes sense, yeah.
That's fine.
And then under number 12, the second paragraph, the first bullet, Ken might have said that. I just remember him talking about emergency vehicles. I didn't remember him talking about utility trucks.
I think he
He did? Okay.
thought he did too.
Yeah. Just when they drive over those humps because they have stuff in the back, they rattle.
I think any truck, I wouldn't want them in my neighborhood. I think any truck going over them, or probably some cars are gonna make a racket, but.
Anything else on page 3? Page 4?
Is the retreat really the 23rd?
Yes.
Is that the date? Okay, all right.
If there's nothing else, then all those in favor of approving the minutes of September 4th, 2018, say aye.
Right.
Aye. Any opposed and no abstentions. move on to public comment. This is the time for anyone in the audience who has any comment to make on anything on the agenda or not on the agenda. This is your opportunity. If you wish to speak,
Yeah,
if you just identify yourself.
Larry Courier, 982 Industrial Avenue. Calming the traffic. We have truck traffic that comes by our house just all the time, especially late at night. I know that you folks, or it was in our local newspaper about South Williston and South Grinnell Road and some others eliminating traffic or trucks. We have the trucks coming by our neighborhood. We are residential because we do have signs on either end saying we are residential, right? Yep. And I'm just, why can't most of these trucks, or all of these trucks, that are heading into Burlington or to go onto the interstate, when they come out of avenues A, B, C, D, why can't they make a right-handed turn to get there instead of taking a left-hand turn, beating the heck out of our little bridge there that we've already resurfaced, and since I've lived there, we've already had to redo that whole bridge. That's our tax money. So we could eliminate that kind of an expense by them coming out and making the right turn instead of the left turn. If you take the time to come from Williston Road to make the left-hand turn to come on to Industrial Avenue, you'll notice there's a good hump in the road where these heavy trucks are making the turn all the time. The same thing is happening in front of my house right now. Again, if you make the trip down Industrial Avenue, come across that bridge, the road is breaking up already. And then we do have the humps there. The road has been resurfaced. I've lived there since 1972. So when I bought the house, it was kind of a Hoboken road, if you want to call it that, being an old northerner here. Now it's a main artery. So if we could change that, and I don't see why not, because there isn't a bridge going the other way for us to have to repair, and I don't think there is one even for the state to have to repair. And I did speak with Mr. Hoare a while back, and he said it's probably going to be within, I don't know, a number of years, we're going to have to redo that bridge again. Now, I have to say that our cement trucks and most all of our tire trucks, which are really heavy, the only time I really see them come by our house is when they're going into the Essex area, not making the right-hand turn to go down on the interstate or go to Burlington. So, not only from my neighborhood, I call it my neighborhood because I'm the old timer there, they've all come and gone except for this guy, that we'll save some tax money. And I thank you, my taxes only went up $88 this year, and I know that my taxes are a lot less than most communities, but then again, in the same breath, I have to say, why shouldn't they be? There hasn't been a community in the state of Vermont that has grown like Williston in the last, 20 years? I'm a small-time business owner, retired, of course, fixed income, doing pretty good with the stock market, but how long does that last, okay? So Vermont does have the reputation of being the most expensive state for retirees to live in. So with that, I want to stay here. I don't want to move. I love where I am, except for maybe a couple of months of the year. Because I have a daughter that's down south, so I can go stay there. She still says, "Come on down, Dad, I'm still welcome." Okay, so with that, I wish you folks would give some thought to what I've just said here. It's a simple thing for them to come out of Avenue A through D, take a right turn, and that'd be the end of it. These trucks are going by our place or our residential area all day and really all night. And one other thing, because I don't want to carry, there's a lot going on here. The other thing, is there any kind of ordinance or anything about these loud mufflers? Because I have somebody that comes by our house about 4:30 in the morning, and I swear I can hear him until he's to the end of Industrial Avenue, and I swear the guy does it on purpose. So I don't know if there's any ordinances on these loud, I know you can't do anything about the Harleys, that's who they are, but on all of these other vehicles, with these loud mufflers that they have. So I thank you for your time. Please give it some thought, and I appreciate it very much, and I'm sure my neighbors would too. And maybe our taxpayers, because maybe if we don't have to do that bridge over, my taxes won't go up $88. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we can ask the Public Works Department to take a look at whether there's any way that we could do that realistically. And I live not too far away from you and know the truck travel on that road. But there is an industrial area that need to get to, whether they need to come down Route 2A and down Industrial, I don't know, but it's a good question. So thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else who has any public comment tonight? If not, then we'll move on to interview and appointments. And tonight we have Jill Pardini, who's here looking to be appointed to the Planning Commission. Last week we interviewed two other folks for the Planning Commission. We now have two vacancies to fill, as well as one for the Recreation Committee. And Jill, we do have your CV that we had given out last week, and we do have your application. So if you would give us a brief description of your background and why you'd like to be on the Planning Commission, that would be very helpful.
So I see the job of the Planning Commission as a group of people that balance the need for development and business and economy with trying to maintain a balance with the ecosystem and community members. My background that relates to planning, I worked for the planning department in Baltimore City, and that was during a time when they were creating their sustainability plan. So in that, some of my tasks were around more of the cleaning and greening initiatives, trying to figure out how they would put that into their plan. So that included things like an initiative called Tree Baltimore, so trying to find places and spaces to put more trees throughout the city. It was to rewrite zoning codes in order to do some more urban farming, so turning in either vacant lots into community gardens or looking at areas that were fairly blighted to perhaps raise them and then create more large-scale urban farms. Additionally, when I was working on the sustainability plan, I was looking at some things that sounds like you've been recently talking about. So I was trying to figure out how could we get chickens back in the city. So if people wanted to have a few chickens in their backyard for those who had the space. And it was also looking at things like compost, which people were very up in arms about. So when you went to big group meetings or community meetings, everyone had fears of compost means rats. So I have been in spaces and places where there's potentially a contention around what is or is not on the docket, and then being able to be in a room with folks and facilitate both experts and members and have people sort of listen and communicate around these types of complex ideas. Later on, when I worked for the Baltimore City Mayor's office, I had quite a bit of opportunity to collaborate with the planning department on various initiatives. So in my portfolio were things like education and health and human services. So we had a big opportunity to do some changes to our schools, to our actual school facilities. This became, as you can imagine, because people feel very strongly about their kids and their schools and their education community. We were thinking and planning long-term for schools that we might need to completely tear down and stop using, or schools that we would build anew, or how we would consolidate, something that Vermont's familiar with. So, those are community meetings that I have strong memories of people being very adamant and vocal about how would we go about doing that, and working with the planning department in that way. Another thing that came about as a result of the changes in environment and inclement weather that has been on the rise in Maryland. So they've had a really wet summer this summer. That's been something they've seen as a trend. It's been increasingly hotter in the summer. So we were looking at an opportunity to create things called resilience hubs. So the planning department was looking at, particularly post the 2015 riot, how do you have communities be sustainable in crisis if you can't get first responders there because there's traffic, or because there's protesters, or because it's flooded and roads are out. So it was looking at communities to identify spaces where you could have a generator, access to water, access to first aid, and that was a huge priority for the mayor at that time, were these resilience hubs. The third thing that we did were things called cooling centers. That was an initiative with the health department. It's something for folks who are older, so seniors, people who are disabled, kids or students who might not be able to have anywhere to go. So when it was extreme heat, it was a space where people could go to get into the air conditioning, to get some water, to just stay out of their row homes or places where they didn't have access to cooler temps. So these are some things that I've done that are sort of planning related, and I'd love to take some of that experience and apply it here to Williston.
Questions for Jill from the board?
I saw in your application, Soccer Without Borders. Yeah. What is that?
So that was a nonprofit I started after graduate school. It predominantly used soccer as the hook to engage newcomer students, so kids that are from other parts of the world that had been resettled via refugee status or asylee status or undocumented immigrants. And these kids were very excited about soccer, so it was trying to get that to be able to engage the families in different needs that they had, so financial literacy for parents, kids getting academic tutoring. We did a lot with kids once they started getting into middle school and high school to do college prep or vocational programs. So soccer was the fun part, and then we tried to sneak in all the other stuff on the backside.
Questions, how long have you been in Williston?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I knew this one was coming for me. I moved here just over 2 years ago. We relocated. My partner is from Vermont, the official sort of seventh generation, and it didn't take much convincing to tell me that this is a great place to live, work, and start a family. So I think we're here for the long term. We fell in love with Williston for its, it's beautiful. It's got everything you need. Especially coming from a city, we weren't totally interested in having to drive 45 minutes to a grocery store or a pub or wherever. And we see so much opportunity for this town, just with how big it is and its location to Burlington and its location to Montpelier. And so I'm excited about being a part of that long-term planning.
And it says you're a Fulbright scholar in Malaysia.
Yeah, that was,
2009. What does that mean?
so that was an opportunity to essentially take a full year to live in a country to do an intensive research sort of partnership. So what I did there was I was curious about a country that does a nationalized curriculum. So imagine, especially since I'm interested in education policy, how do you take a sort of a one model that's usually built in the capital, so in Kuala Lumpur, and then try to put it everywhere else in this country that's vastly different. Kuala Lumpur is like a state-of-the-art, 21st century, high-tech city. And then you go to rural Kuala Terengganu, where I decided to do a lot of my on-the-ground sort of qualitative research. And you just find that you can't pick up that model and put it in places that just don't have the same resources. So I was curious from sort of a macro scale of, this is a great idea in theory that we could all be working off of some sort of pedagogy that we agree with or a curriculum we agree with. And it's just in practice, it becomes really, really challenging. Mm-hmm.
Joe, first a comment, then actually a couple questions, if you don't mind. I try to take notes when we're interviewing people. I could not keep up with you. But I do have your resume, so thank you. I guess I want to shift the focus a little bit to Williston. Have you had a chance to take a look at our town comprehensive plan? And if yes,
Yes.
what do you think of it? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where should we be focusing on?
I did have a chance to look at it. It's comprehensive, right, 130-plus pages. Where I get excited about it is the inclusion of certain things that I just haven't seen because of the places I've lived previously. So the inclusion of things around energy efficiency and moving towards, things that I think Williston is able to do around could we think solar? Could we think, things that you're talking about with compost? I think there's so many opportunities that Williston can do because of it being located in Vermont, and then because, as the gentleman said previously, it's a place that's actually booming, right? Unlike so many other places in Vermont, it isn't having a dwindling tax base. It isn't having a problem. And if anything, our problem is we can't keep up with the building to have people here. So that excites me. I think another thing around, I have a passion for sort of access and equity issues, and I think there already is more transportation opportunities in Williston than there are in so many other areas in Vermont, which is a huge challenge for people who are under-resourced. So I think starting with that as our base, but then and thinking about conscientiously building that out so that Williston could be an inclusive place, because it is a place that folks want to get to, because we do have things, like the big box stores and places that are affordable for people to eat or buy clothes for their kids.
Okay, good, thank you. My next question, I tend to ask, I'm not sure why, but, and it's I ask everyone, I don't know what it is you do for work, but it's the conflict of interest question. What would you do to recognize a conflict of interest, and what would you do about it?
Yeah, so at this moment, because I am a full-time PhD student, and I hope to eventually work, when I finish my dissertation, which I'm very much in the middle of. So I don't perceive a lot of conflict of interest in terms of just like logistics, so time and showing up and being there and being prepared by having read materials. If anything, adding more stacks to my reading, it wouldn't be a problem at this point. Okay. In terms of more tangible, I like Teresa mentioned, I'm new to Williston, so I don't have sort of this invested relationships, whether it's business or community members. I'm getting to know my neighborhood, and I'm getting to know the communities that we've sought out already. But at this moment, I feel that to me is one of the unique things I bring to this interview and this opportunity to serve, is that I think this is an opportunity for Williston to look at, if you are looking for folks who want to come and be homeowners and start families, to sort of offset this aging population in Williston. I bring that perspective in because I absolutely was excited to come and be here and put down roots, and being mindful of that in long-term planning, I think is a unique lens that I bring.
And do you see a potential, I realize you're a grad student now, or I didn't realize, but now I realize, you're a grad student now, so there's probably minimal potential for there to be a conflict between, let's say, your professional life and decisions you need to make on the planning commission. So that's really where I was trying to focus this. I'm sorry if I didn't ask the question well.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry if I misunderstood it, but I don't see that. I would have a lot of conflict of interest around decisions we were making while I serve in these next 4 years.
Okay, and once you were, let's say, employed versus being a grad student, do you think again, there might be a potential for there to be conflict?
I think my instinct would be to ask. My instinct would be if it felt or it looked as though there could be any inclination for it or any linkage whatsoever. As soon as I discovered that, I think I would, one, bring it to the commission or the local Williston staff or the select board, whatever the appropriate avenue would be to raise that. I don't think, I'm not interested in sort of using this as a position of power in any way. To me, it's more a position to serve.
Okay, great, thank you.
You said you were a PhD student, not a grad student, right?
Right, PhD student.
Any further questions for Jill? Thank you very much, and I think we'll take up the issue now as far as appointments for the two spots that we
Thank you.
have.
I have a recommendation.
Okay,
Consider, I would recommend, from looking at my notes, we have good candidates and all, but I would recommend Jill and Ron to the Planning Commission and
so we have
Cindy to the Rec Committee. Do we have 3 positions
we
open?
have 2 positions for the Planning Commission.
Right.
2 open, and 1 for the Recreation Committee.
That would work then.
So you did Jill and Oh, okay. Well, we have different dates that we need to appoint them to. One through June of 2019 and one through June of 2022. And then the rec committee is through June 2019. So there are 3 different motions that are recommended to be made.
I see. So, do you want me to make motions, or?
Well,
Yes.
or we can just have a quick discussion.
We could, yes.
I actually agree with your summary. If I look at my notes and my, for lack of a better word, sorry about this, I don't want to put in these crash terms, but the rating system I used, I actually wonder if we could ask either one of you if you have a preference. That would help make our life easier.
I don't have a preference, so I would go either way.
I could go either way.
You're supposed to make our life easier. Okay,
Preference for what?
For who would fill what slot?
the terms are different lengths. One is shorter than the other.
Yeah.
The thought is that people won't leave after a short time. They would
Okay.
probably re-look to, if they like it, I guess. So-
We would be probably reappointing people in 2019, so.
Yeah, unless there was some issue or the person didn't like the role. So I'm willing to make a motion unless you have more.
Good.
I move to appoint Ron Bomer to the Planning Commission to an unexpired 4-year term through June 30th, 2019.
Would
Second.
you like to do them all together?
I
or-
can. I move to appoint Jill Pardini to the Planning Commission for an unexpired term, 4-year term through June 30th, 2022. And I move to appoint Cindy Provost to the Recreation Committee to an unexpired term, 3-year term through June 30th, 2019.
Second all three.
We have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
It is a tough call. Actually, I think Cindy would have done well on the planning commission as well. And given the turnover, if she's interested when another slot comes up, I think she should be first on that list.
Sounds reasonable. Any further discussion on the motion?
It's always tough, actually. We seem to have good candidates. People who volunteer generally are enthusiastic and want to serve, so.
Absolutely true. So all those in favor of the motion say aye.
I
Any opposed, and no abstentions. Congratulations. both of you.
Thank you.
So moving on to the Stormwater Grant Policy Amendment, James Sherrard, Stormwater Coordinator, is here, and he has written us a memo regarding this, so perhaps you would give us an overview of your memo and what you're requesting.
Nice to see you all. I actually wrote you 2 exceptionally wonderful memos for tonight.
Yes, saw them both.
The first on the list is the Stormwater Grant Policy Amendment. Pretty straightforward. The general gist is, if you recall, a while back, we put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how to get grant funds and then redistribute them equitably to all the neighborhoods participating in the flow restoration plan. Now, luckily, we don't need to rehash that, but we can't begin to give out the money under the current wording of the stormwater grant policy. And the reason that that's the case is it's linked to incorporation into our state permit, our general permit. I can touch upon this in greater depth if you'd like in my next memo, but in short, that permit expired, was administratively continued. We could not incorporate permits, individual permits, while it was administratively continued. And even though the permit has come back out, we can't incorporate any of the town's permits into our greater general permit until we renew something called the SWIMP, the Stormwater Management Plan. That's due January of 19. Will probably take us that long to get there. And then it needs to go both through approval and public comment at the state level. So realistically, we'd be sitting on funds, potentially until next spring. The policy language change I've suggested is we just swap incorporation into the Town of Williston MS4 general permit for formal acceptance of the stormwater system in accordance with our stormwater agreement. We've formally accepted 2 neighborhoods so far, and they would be the only ones eligible to receive their proportion of the funds. By the end of this calendar year, we'll have 3 to 5 more likely. So we can start unloading these funds, and I know Jennifer would like to do that.
Questions for James?
No, I think it's the right thing to do.
A motion then is in order.
Move to amend the neighborhood stormwater grant policy as presented.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No abstentions. All right, then we'll move on to the program update.
Yeah, the slightly lengthier memorandum starts out with what I was just touching upon. We have a general permit to rule them all here in the town of Williston. That expired. It's back in play. Town staff, myself, is working on updating that SWIMP, which will likely take to 2019. And for all intents and purposes, we're still covered underneath that permit. It's just been administratively continued, and we need to get this SWIMP in place to have the new one, which is adding a lot of new requirements, a few of which I'd love to list to you because we'll probably be talking about them in the coming years. Well, you're all very familiar with the Florida Williston.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so any road segments that are directly connected to a water of the state. So a road segment could drain into someone's field, and that's not hydrologically connected. A road segment that goes right into Muddy Brook is hydrologically connected. So that's luckily been delineated for us, but we're going to need to systematically chip away at addressing those. That could be new ditching, regrading of berms, so on and so forth. There are a lot of different things that go into play, but that's one of the things we're going to need to address in that SWIMP update. Another one, and this is probably the big one if I had to rank them, is the phosphorus control plan. Lake Champlain is impaired due to phosphorus, and every MS4 community, which we are in the basin, needs to have a phosphorus plan. There are a variety of ways that we can address that, of which you'll probably be hearing more of in the future, but that's going to be similar to the flow restoration plan, but just with a focus on phosphorus instead of flow. Lastly, and this is the one that I still have a lot of question marks about, there's a portion of a tributary to Muddy Brook that's impaired due to chloride. It's the portion that you would probably guess. It has our box stores on it, off Marshall Ave. Tributary number 4 to Muddy Brook, in case anyone was really curious. That's going to require a chloride plan. So still, we don't actually have what's required us from the state, so I can't talk in detail what that looks like, but that's coming down the pike, and those are all part of that SWIMP that's due in January.
So two questions. One on the, the phosphorus control. I have a hard time thinking we need to spend money in Williston.
Tell it to the state.
I know, I'm just saying, is there any discussion? I don't know what higher levels of discussion we're involved in, but when the town of Burlington frequently dumps out 3 million gallons of partially treated sewage, I have a hard time thinking about the lawn runoffs or, it's, in terms of a priority, I'm not saying it's not a problem, but, what should we address first? And I understand it's our community money, not Burlington's community money that we're dealing with here, but it still seems like the state should be focusing on maybe where the problems are, but.
I understood, and you bring up a really good point, and I think the state and nonprofit advocacy groups can do a better job getting that message out to the residents of Vermont. Wastewater treatment plants, certainly with combined sewer overflows, that's a health hazard, brings lots of pollutants and damaging constituents into the lake. However, from a phosphorus standpoint, they're less than 3% of the total problem. So to put that in perspective, developed surfaces such as rooftops, roadways, parking lots, that's 40% of the phosphorus problem. Ag land, our dairy farms and other ag lands, that's another 40% of the problem. So when you're looking at communities that are contributing to the issue, it's rural, it's urban, and The wastewater load is
Phosphorus
negligible.
isn't coming from the treatment plant, it's coming
That's
from.
accurate.
It's coming from ag and houses.
Yep,
So you're saying the impact of the sewage plants overspilling is more just inability to swim in the water because it's polluted?
yeah, I would say
Not necessarily causing algae blooms.
it's
I
an
didn't know
acute
that.
problem
Yeah.
that could have long-term health effects if you swim at the wrong time, but it's an acute issue when you have a combined sewer overflow. The systemic issue is the constant introduction of phosphorus via
Okay.
our waterways.
All right.
With regards to how to, oh, sorry, do you mind if I just address one more point? With regards to one other thing you said about how we prioritize our money, it's gonna be a permit requirement, so if we don't meet their timelines that they laid out, we could lose our permit coverage, and I actually don't know what happens if you refuse to abide by your MS4 general permit, but there could be fines.
Where does phosphorus come from if it's on a roof in a driveway and goes into stormwater and gets into the lake? I mean, how does there phosphorus from my roof?
Great question. So there's something called dry deposition, and basically when the wind blows, what we're not seeing is a lot of minuscule particles depositing onto surfaces. Some of those come from, if you're looking at the entire United States, as the wind blows, New England's unfortunately about the tailpipe of everything that's flowing through. So power plants in the past had a large contribution of phosphorus and sulfur through improvements via the EPA and scrubbers in our power plants. That's been reduced, but still through dry deposition, the stuff the wind's blowing, that gets on rooftops and roadways. Vehicular traffic also adds a lot of phosphorus. There's phosphorus in the oils and gasoline that can drip and land on our roadways. So roads and parking lots have, in a rough sense, about twice the parts per milligram, or twice the concentration of phosphorus than a rooftop, but they both still have them. When it comes to ag land, the real issue there is that phosphorus binds to soil. So if you had a phosphorus fertilizer or manure and you spread it over a field, if a light rain comes, it will slowly get that phosphorus into solution, but then binding onto the soil. So as long as the soil stays on the farmer's field, we don't have a phosphorus problem. The issue is through poor agricultural best management practices for generations. We haven't protected our stream buffers. We haven't protected our river buffers. We've had agricultural practices that don't have crop cover plants when your primary crop is out. So it increases erosion from those ag lands, and that results in phosphorus-laden sediment being washed over farms, into brooks, into the river, and into the lake.
When I was a kid growing up in Richmond, there were a couple of farms that used to wash their manure spreaders off in the rivers.
Of course.
So we'll send you the bill?
I was a victim, sir. I couldn't swim at the gorge one time because of that.
So my second question was just the chloride you talked about, that's primarily just salt that's from salting the parking lots? Is that what that is?
Yeah, so again, we haven't been given the level of detail we are expected to receive from the state, so I'm not sure how much detail I can get into. But I can say that the town of Williston actually has a fairly good chloride plan. We do not dump salt when we do not need to. It's expensive. We do our best to hold off on that. We have looked into other processes such as brines, but large part we still use salt. It is my guess that the reason that trib is the one contaminated due to chloride and not others in the town is because of the box stores. And traditionally what happens is they hire a subcontractor to salt their parking lots and their walking areas. And because the subcontractor doesn't want to get sued, they dump as much salt as they possibly can, and they still make money. And that results in chlorination of those streams. There are some really exciting ways to address that that's being pioneered in New Hampshire, which is nice because they're a bordering state. That has not come over into practice in Vermont yet, but we are talking about it at all of our chloride conferences, so it's on our radar.
The only thing I'll add is it's easy to blame the state for the phosphorus limits or pains that we have to go through, but I'll remind everybody that the TMDL is an EPA our partner, and Vermont participated in developing it, but it is not Vermont's TMDL. It is EPA's, and we have to abide by it.
No, I'm the last person that would want to stop cleaning up the lake. I just wanted to make sure it's proportional, so I'm glad you educated me on where that phosphorus comes from, because I was thinking sewage from these plants would create phosphorus problems, and evidently they don't. So it's good to know. You know, it would be an economic disaster for Vermont to lose something like the lake or the recreational benefits of the lake.
I agree.
Just out of curiosity, it doesn't affect our policy, so I don't want to waste any time, but just ask this quickly. What percentage of the phosphorus dry deposition is atmospheric coming from other states? Do we know? Like, that's getting into Lake Champlain?
I cannot answer that question. Although, when you're talking about dry deposition on the lake,
I mean, dry deposition on the lake, on the rooftops, that's getting into the lake eventually.
if I understand your question correctly, the number for developed surfaces, which is essentially anything impervious, again, roads, parking lots, rooftops, that's set at a roughly 40% of the problem. So while that's not all dry deposition, a portion of it is. What that portion is, I can't tell you.
It reminds me of the acid rain issues that we had in the 80s. So, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any further questions for James on this?
I can keep going through the stormwater update.
Sure.
If you'd like. Very similar to the last update I gave, I just updated the numbers for the grants. I think the one to mention is that we've been awarded $930,000 in grant funds to facilitate $1,800,000 in projects. So all of those grants were 50% match, which is incredible. And I think we thank DEC and their project partners for helping us get those grants. A significant percentage of those, $1,380,000, is for the flow restoration plan, which again, I would say Williston is leading the pack in how aggressive we've been in our timeline getting these things in the ground. We have a couple other small grants, although important. That $21,000 is for a program dedicated to address those hydrologically connected roads. We're going to receive that $21,000, which is in addition to $15,500 that we got this past summer. I'll run through the Allen Brook. We have a number of neighborhoods participating. We are making progress this year in particular. 2 neighborhoods have been accepted, Breton Woods and Southridge. That's a big deal. 7 neighbors are substantially complete, and we're basically working on getting final legal documents in place to accept those. So probably the majority of those will be accepted by this year, that's my hope. 2 neighborhoods are under construction. Now, when I wrote this, that was the case. I have Heritage Meadows and Meadow Ridge. Heritage Meadows is essentially done with construction. We just need to do a final walkthrough with the engineers. 3 neighborhoods are going to begin construction. Old Stage, the construction equipment is on site. Taft's Farms and Indian Ridge have not started yet. They are anticipated to start this summer, well, this fall at this point. 1 neighborhood has recently received a grant that was just fully executed. Rick, I think you just got that stuff in your mailbox this past day or so. So that's for Williston Commons, right down the street here. And then 3 neighborhoods haven't made any progress that the town's aware of, but they have plenty of years to do so and still meet their stormwater agreements. Moving on to Lamplight Acres. You guys are well familiar with this. We got a grant from it's a TA grant from VTrans. The big update there is that we got over the right-of-way clearance hurdle, which is a big deal. It means that we can work where we want to work and don't need to buy any land or anything. So we just recently got that, and we're planning on putting out bids for the work this January, with construction hopefully completed next calendar year. And that'll be great for the residents of Lamplight. Worked with Jennifer to pull together these last 2 categories of the loans. 6 neighborhoods have signed agreements for loans ranging from $26,000 to $370,000, and the cash flow on the very last page depicts those. Already one of those neighborhoods is beginning to pay back their loan. And then the cash flow, which again Jennifer pulled together, I think the big takeaway there is that by next June 2019, we should have, after everything's said and done with all of our other water quality projects and outstanding loans, we should have $240,000 available for more loans to neighborhoods. In the write-up, it says we may need to move funds from perhaps the flow restoration bucket into the loan bucket if needed. I just point out, if Meadow Ridge is lucky enough to want to move forward or get a grant to help move forward, the final phase of their project could cost $300,000+. And if they asked for a loan on top of the loan they already have, that would obviously empty our coffers. Not that we couldn't handle it in the budget, we just might need to move some things around. So that is the update.
Any questions for James? Things are coming along very nicely.
Our neighborhood's pond looks, guys did a really fabulous job. Red
That
line.
particular contractor has now worked with us for 2 summers and has done a great job, so we're happy to keep working with him.
Who is it?
Red Line, which
Red
is
Line,
Mo DuBois Jr.
I'm sorry, is,
Mo DuBois Jr.,
Oh,
his
okay.
dad's also known in the area.
yep.
Two-person company, actually. He's just him and one other person, and he did a fantastic job.
Glad you think so.
Okay, good, thanks.
Good, thank you, James. Move on to the comprehensive plan amendments, and our new planning director, Matt Belanger, is here, and if you've written an extensive memo here for us, so so if you could give us a good overview of this, we would be appreciated.
Certainly. So there are 2 proposed comprehensive plan amendments that have been forwarded by the Planning Commission to the Select Board for consideration. One is edits to the existing Chapter 13 of the comprehensive plan. This is currently the open space chapter, and broadly, the amendments will add some interests related to historic and cultural resources, archaeological resources, forest fragmentation, and natural and wildlife resources, directing the town to examine some of the ways our bylaw works in those areas. In particular, the adoption of some language in the comprehensive plan as it relates to archaeological resources is important because it's a requirement of the downtown board for the maintenance of our state designated growth center at Taft Corners that the town have archaeological resources discussed in its comprehensive plan and managed in its development review and the way it spends its money and considers projects and things like that. So that's the Chapter 13 edits very broadly. The other piece is the village master plan. And so this, you know, where what you see with Chapter 13 is a red line strikeout document, what you see for the village master plan has no edits because it's all new and it's proposed to be adopted currently as an appendix to the existing comprehensive plan. The village master plan comes out of some public process that we started back in May of 2016 and resulted in policies and objectives related broadly to land use standards in the village and historic preservation as it relates to how buildings are modified or built, transportation infrastructure, i.e. Williston Road, and making sure that that corridor is bikeable, walkable, drivable for all of the users who come through the village or access the village using it. And the slightly more nebulous category of village vibrancy, making sure that the goals of the town plan and its regulatory scheme enhance activity in the village, support the multi-use commercial and residential community in the village, and really leverage those things that make the village a unique place within the town. So those are the 3 broad categories. There are objectives and policies for each. I can go into more detail on any of them or answer any questions you folks have about what's in that document as well.
Let's ask the board if they have questions regarding the documents, first of all.
I read the Chapter 13 pretty carefully because of the, just because it was an edit from something previously approved. And I was just wondering why some sections were, I just thought it funny, some excerpts were, things were taken out. and replaced with other verbiage, and I was just, it almost seemed like a history revision, or maybe,
So, part of that, for example, talking about river corridors, you see it come out, you see it go back in
I saw
another
that.
place.
It
It's
went back
essentially
in a
identical.
little ways down, right?
The other one, I think where that's happening is in the discussion of some of the,
Historical, about the geological, historical, first people.
so what we wanted to do here was be quite a bit more expansive than the plan was in the past. Some of this language didn't really have much of anywhere to live before. It is a little bit lengthy, but in the end, the policies that come out of it in 13.4.1.2.3 are directly the ones that were recommended to us by the agencies at the state that deal with these things. So, consider archaeological resources and development review, use the Division for Historic Preservation in evaluating impacts. These are things that have been, to some extent, off of our radar at the local review level and just saying, oh, well, Act 250 will catch that. The reality for us is that there are a lot of sub-Act 250 projects that still involve, pretty extensive potential impacts to these resources. So calling out in here that we would look at how we could do that in our local review still leaves up the question of what that bylaw amendment would really look like and how restrictive or prescriptive it would be.
Okay,
So this just sort of establishes it needs to be done, but what needs to be done would be an ordinance or bylaw issue.
So this is a consider.
Yeah.
And then the bylaw might say evaluate and protect. We have a pretty solid map of where we believe our potential archaeological resources are. Most of them are in flat places, floodplains, and near river corridors, because that's where people were. So there's a great deal of development that is not likely to hit any of those mapped potential archaeological resources. In fact, the most recent example of development that did touch on those resources was development proposed by the town related to our trail system, where we did need to go in and do additional assessment and think about how we were going to deal with the potential presence and, in fact, presence of archaeological resources in our work area.
So and I realize I'm jumping the gun, this is only the, consider, but would that potentially fall on the landowners, who potentially want to develop on their shoulders? Or should I think of archaeological resources as more of a town-wide benefit, and thus the town should be doing some of the assessments, so we have a better idea of where they are. So when it comes time to develop, let's say a specific piece of land, instead of saying, go figure out what's there and, whatever step or level that requires, we would be further along in that and say, okay, this is where we know potential is. I'm just trying to get a sense of that, but maybe now's not the time to have that discussion, because obviously the town plan won't get into that level of detail.
I think we have a good model in the way we've looked at some of our other conservation resources. So we can start with what's been mapped by someone else, generally something that comes out of the state, but we can add local knowledge to it. And in fact, that's really been our experience of what we need to do when it comes to our wildlife habitat areas and travel corridors. The state map that we base jurisdiction for those things on, meaning that if you propose a development that's in one of those areas in Williston, you have to do what's called a habitat disturbance assessment. So you do have to provide additional expertise and information when you're proposing to be in one of those areas. Those areas, as they are currently mapped, are very extensive. Basically, everything in Williston that's forested is mapped as a wildlife habitat or wildlife travel corridor. And what that means is every one of those applicants then has to go hire a wildlife biologist to do a disturbance assessment and report it at the DRB. And so we've had this rule since 2014, and it's become a bit of a rote exercise. In other words, the outcome of the habitat disturbance assessment doesn't really ever say, oh gosh, don't develop this parcel. Yeah. It shifts things around a little bit. And some of them say, yes, it's forested, it's on the map, there's nothing really of note that's particularly utilizing this area that we need to protect. We know that we can integrate more of our local knowledge and refine that map. And in fact, that's one of the things that this plan amendment calls for, is for us to go in and refine those maps so they touch fewer areas in the town, but when they do, it really matters. And we're really trying to focus in on those things that need to be protected. I would look at the archaeological resources the same way. We have some broadly mapped areas that we know are probably sensitive. We're lucky in that many of them are in areas where development's not likely to ever be proposed, but we can add to that with local knowledge, places UVM has studied, places that people tell us they found artifacts. We can refine that map using the direction this plan gives us. And I would look at all of that as a component of what we call Chapter 27 of the bylaw, where we have all these additional mapped resources that we will consider if they're present, and focusing those in.
Very good, thanks.
Do people generally know if they own property that has archaeological significance?
I don't know that they would know offhand. If it fell within one of those mapped areas, it would be one of the first things we would be able to tell somebody. That's part of our pre-application review for developments, is to look at all those resource maps and say, yep, you know, your parcel touches this, this, and this. Here are the information pieces you're gonna have to provide. Other folks who have been on their land for a long time, if you know you've got a cornfield that you've walked through after you plowed and you found flints or arrowheads, if you're down near the river, you're very likely to have something. Some folks are aware that the mound between Allenbrook School and Williston Road, the little hilltop there, is a significant archaeological resource.
It is.
Yeah, that's.
Is it?
It's Paleo-Indian artifacts that have been found there in the past. I don't know that the mound itself is an artifact, but it was a high point that people, you know, probably used over a significant amount of time, enough to accumulate those resources.
And I had just one more small comment. So I understand, I think, your other points. 13.1.7, it says monitor and assess the significant wildlife habitat area model data for its continued relevance. And then you deleted monitor and assess out of the verbiage for the actual, I guess, the implementation or work that you were going to do.
Yeah, I think what we're really, you know, the language monitor assess in the top end makes sense, but what we're really doing is reviewing what's going into the maps that are being produced outside of town and how should we be adjusting them based on what we know about the town. So it, you know, monitor kind of sounds like we're looking over the state's shoulder and saying we're making sure you're doing your job, making those maps. That's not really what it's about. It's about adding local knowledge.
Okay, that's good. I like that. Yeah, thank you.
So our request tonight is to schedule 2 public hearings on the amendments to the comprehensive plan. And if there are no other questions for Matt, a motion to that effect would be in order.
So is this for both section 13 and the town,
Village.
the village plan?
That's the request, yes.
Yes, that's the request.
So we haven't discussed at all the village plan. I mean,
We have not.
will we have more opportunity at the, you know, at and around the times of getting public comment?
So is there, I guess the question is there a time commitment that we need to fulfill for the vision?
It'd be nice to get an overview, right? Like have
Yes.
Matt kind of present, this is what we're thinking. Because I have to admit, I quickly went through it. It's a big document that's brand new, so it's not an edit. Wasn't necessarily what I expected, and I saw pictures of things like strip malls in there. I know that's historical. It's in there, it's a picture. I don't want to see strip malls, you know,
Yeah,
next to City Hall.
That was actually a model of a strip mall that was created
Right, I
as if
understand.
one was placed at Slate Barn to show what that would.
It'd be nice to have somebody present. I don't know if anybody else thinks that way, but
No, I
seeing-
think so. Just the question in mind is there a time problem with doing that as a separate item?
Because don't we want to do that before we take it to a town, or is it the results of the townspeople's input, along with our own, that would go into an update that,
One thing you might want to, there are going to be 2 public hearings required on this.
okay?
So that might buy you a little bit more time, but if if you don't feel uncomfortable, that's fine too.
Well, let me ask it this way, at the first one, will Matt present to us or present to the, it would be good to see kind of that vision hear it from.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a presentation that kind of hits the high points of what's
Yeah.
in here and answer
Your
questions.
intent.
Happy to do that as part of the first public hearing you set, if that works. I wouldn't,
Yeah.
I think I can do it in 5 or 7 minutes and then give you guys room for questions after that. It's a relatively lengthy document, but when I break it into sections, some of these are recitation of history or planning history of the village, and
Right, I did get that, so there's a lot of history in there for sure, so I went over that quickly, but I caught the strip mall. But it would be nice to know is, here's what the village is as a result of the last how many years, we've got this. This is what we'd like to change, and this is how we're gonna go about changing it, or we think, does that sound?
Sure, and if it's acceptable for the board to do it at the very first public hearing, then that's fine.
Interesting.
So then a motion to schedule two public hearings would be a motion that would be in order.
Move to schedule 2 public hearings to consider amendments to the Williston 2016 to 2024 comprehensive plan.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
The only thing I wanted to add to that discussion is one thing that gives me, because I've not spent the time on this, I want to, before eventually voting yes or no, but one thing that gives me confidence to move it forward at least is when the planning commission has reviewed it and decided that it is it's what they want to send to us. That to me is whatever the right word is, a positive indication of that I'll like it. I may have some specific little issues with it, but overall I'll like it.
It's one of the more important things it seems like we would do, right? Is if we have long-term comprehensive strategy plan that we should be engaged.
Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Good job.
So moving on to
That
town
hump.
legal.
Ellenbrook School, and
Yeah.
Town legal counsel for general matters. Rick, I presume you're talking about this?
I'm going to let Eric start it
okay.
off and
All right.
I'll add a little bit.
So the board may recall, longtime town attorney Joe Fallon is retiring at the end of the year. So we've undergone a process the last few months to select a new firm to represent the town in matters of general counsel. We issued a request for qualifications that was due back at the end of June, and the committee put together to review those included Ted, Rick, and Public Works Director Bruce Hoare. The committee met. We got 4 responses to the request for qualifications. The committee reviewed them. Put forward a recommendation, a consensus, the firm Sissel, Page and Fletcher out of Burlington as the preferred firm. From there, Rick checked references that were listed, a number of references thoroughly. We had a meeting with staff at Sissel, Page and Fletcher last week, and that meeting confirmed the committee's recommendation to take the board tonight for them to serve as our new counsel.
So questions for Rick and Eric regarding the recommendation?
so what kind of criteria did you come up with to score the different firms? What,
The
What are you
length
looking
of
for?
municipal law experience was one, the type or the number and quality of members of their law firm that they assign, because they're not necessarily going to be dealing with just one person, like we were with Joe Fallon.
that's probably a good thing.
Right, well, there's advantages and disadvantages, but, overall, I think it's probably a good thing. But Joe served us well for 20 years, so it's hard to complain about that.
No complaints for me.
One of the references I checked was Joe Fallon, and his comment was they're a great firm. They're very knowledgeable on municipal law. He said your legal bills will probably go up a little bit, though. That's largely because Joe's hourly rate is lower than most other firms. And so that was a nice added advantage that Joe offered to us. Another person I checked with, because she's has a legal background, of course, is one of our board members, Joy, who was, I just read an email a moment ago, I was checking, and she apologized. She had planned to be here this evening, but at the last minute something came off relating to her business. But she spoke very highly of this firm as well.
I leave it totally in your hands in terms of the recommendation. The one question I have, or maybe it's more of a comment, just to make sure I'm correct, or correct me. This is for general legal services. On a case-by-case basis, we may choose a different law firm or attorney with a specific expertise that we need help with.
Actually, we will continue to use Paul Gillis for land use issues. We will continue to use McNeil, Letty, I'm not sure I get the name right. Sheehan. For labor relations. If we have any major personnel matters, we might go with someone else, but generally that's what we've been going with. There's certainly the possibility in the future we might shift some of that work or add it to Stitzel Page, but we're not making any commitment at this time. It's just general legal issues that Joe has been handling.
Do they support any other towns or municipalities?
Yes, many,
They do.
yes.
It's their main focus.
So there's no concern about time or their ability to support another town?
No, I don't have any concern about that. One concern I
Okay.
might have is, on occasion, it wouldn't be very often, there might be a conflict of interest among one of their members. For example, if we have a dispute with a neighboring town like Shelburne, for example, or.
They support Shelburne?
Yeah,
They support.
Shelburne's their client, yeah. It's a very rare thing, and if it does happen, we have other resources, I mean.
Okay, that's fair enough, yeah.
And we may end up having some sort of dispute with Shelburne, because there's one property that there's a question of where the town border is, and so that'll be an interesting one to deal with. So, oh, and one final thing too, Joe is, we may be needing this firm sooner rather than later. First of all, Joe does not want to handle any issue that might lead to litigation, because he won't be able to follow through in litigation. And secondly, he's moving out of state, I think the end of October. So he won't even be in the area anymore.
Any further questions? A motion is in order.
I move to select the firm Stitzel Page. Stitzel, Page, and Fletcher for general legal services.
Is there a second?
Second?
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to traffic calming policy, and Eric, you've done some modifications of it since we talked last, I believe.
Yep.
So if you'd like to talk about that.
So, including your packet is a redlined, third draft of this for a board review and discussion tonight. The majority of changes are under section 3 of the policy statements. So from our discussion the last few meetings, looking at this issue with this policy and kind of North Wilson Road issue and things we've discussed, Brendan Woods, trying to, I went back and thought about this and trying to be clear about traffic calming and traffic control devices. So I've added draft language in here to kind of define those two pieces, talk about best practices in terms of traffic calming, referencing FHWA and AOV-Trans resources, and also distinguishing the roles of the two. So traffic calming devices, physical roadway changes may require MUTCD compliant signage and markings. Additionally, added MUTCD compliant signage may be a recommendation in some circumstances to calm traffic. But traffic control devices are primarily regulatory in nature. And their implementation in many circumstances must be warranted by data collected. So trying to parse out the separation of those two, there is some overlap, but traffic calming is really going to be physical roadway changes which are supported by federal, state level best practices interpreted by consultants that would lead to give us the different pros and cons to weigh on each. So the major changes is section 3, and then the other major change, we had an appendice in here before that had a draft scoring matrix. And after going through this, thinking, okay, this is a new policy, recommendation from the RPC on that was these scoring matrices, they're best evolved over time as you have cases to score. So I've struck the appendice and put language in there that DPW would work to develop this and revise as necessary, and could certainly keep the board apprised to what that looks like as it's further developed. We have some scoring comments from them as well, as we do that work. And voice is a little scratchy tonight.
Questions or comments regarding the revised suggested policy?
Well, one thing, and I'm sorry if I didn't pick up on this earlier, one thing, it's on the minor side, don't get me wrong, but I noticed in at least 2 places, it's under section 3, it says, it is a policy of the select board. And I would think it would say it is a policy of the town. Yes, the select board adopts it, but, and maybe that's I don't, it just, when I saw that, I always thought when we adopt policies, we're adopting it for the town, not for us as, yeah. I don't know if that's a big deal at all, I don't think it is.
We can make that
That's
change.
good.
Yeah. But other than that, I'm good with it. My one concern, and it's not a concern to change anything, but with the MUTCD, that guidance document, I like the idea that there be some flexibility. But when we say things like, shall follow, or with no exceptions, it takes away any flexibility. It doesn't take away, but it really limits.
I sent the same comment to Eric that you gotta add, so I'm agreeing with you that we should have some common sense or flexibility in these things and not make it.
When things are adopted on a national level, it's sometimes hard to bring those national standards, if you will, down to a local road,
There's another main piece in here, because I think what you've done in this latest edit is basically said, well, the MUTCD is not really traffic calming. That's traffic control. The document is traffic calming. So the policies we're adopting are really somehow best practices of the Federal Highway Administration and VTrans, not MUTCD anymore.
That's correct.
I think that's what you're saying. So again, I would like to see, again, some common, use a little common sense in these as well. And I appreciate your comments in here about safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, much appreciated. Those were some comments I had sent back to Eric as well, because it seems like we have to have some verification. And the last thing is something I kind of harped on about. Bruce is exceptionally, experienced, but when he came in here last week and was telling us about the policy and difference to Mr. Finnefrock's input, he kept on making the comment that the PEs recommended something as a result, and I just don't think that, I think that just because the PEs are the professional engineers, just because they recommend something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for the situation, right? And I guess I had the impression that there was nothing checking that, right? At the end of the day, to me, the buck stops with us, and then to Rick, to Bruce, and Bruce's staff. It's not, we could blame the PEs, but it's our town, it's our residents that are being impacted, so we should have some, and I guess, I don't know what that is, though. I don't know what, I'm not a traffic expert, but I could find this stuff. It didn't take too much work to find out that, 10-foot wide roads weren't smart to put rumble strips on. They're a safety issue. Or at least in some places, they're listed and documented as safety issues, including these federal documents, so.
I was working on subsection 3.3 to
Yep.
try to get at that issue, and I left it kind of broad here.
Yes.
Kind of the intent was that these federal and state regulation documents would be interpreted by PE serving as consultants, and as that consultation takes place, that analysis the board would need to interpret that and what they use their expertise to bring to the board, then ultimately the board would need to decide based on their interpretation of what path to go down.
I think it's a great thing to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like this. I just come back to, now we're getting away from the MUTCD, we're going to other sets of documents. We should have some say, or there should be some wiggle room in terms of what makes sense for Williston.
So is there agreement that we need to have some other wording on that particular item? And in the, changing in the 3.3 and 3.4, it's a policy of the town, it's the select board.
I like that too, yeah.
So we would need to address this at the next meeting perhaps, with the appropriate wording changes.
Could I ask, would it be wise to have town council, like, whoever's that gonna be next week, I guess? One of the issues that I'm concerned about is that, you know, if the federal and state standards are that the MUTCD is the standard and it must be followed. That's, you know, that doesn't really affect the town. It's something that is, you know, another government has said this is what has to happen. My concern is that, you know, actually going back to 3.4, with no exceptions, all traffic control devices must follow the MUTCD. What I'm concerned is the flip side of the question is like town liability. If we have a traffic calming measure that we put in that we thought, well, the MUTCD says that this is what should happen at this in this context, but our common sense tells us not to do it, and then someone gets hurt, will they sue us because we didn't follow the legal standard that the law requires from federal and state mandate? On the other hand, are we going to open ourselves up to litigation for following it when we don't necessarily have to, and any fool would have known not to put rumble strips in, you know, wherever somebody got hurt. So it's a question of, you know, what kind of legal duty does the MUTCD pose on the town now? And then what would be the legal risk to adopting a regulation or ordinance that says that we either must or in the alternative may follow the MUTCD. If someone gets hurt, can they sue us because we didn't engineer the road appropriately? So I'd like a legal opinion on that if possible.
I think it's a good thing to ask. I mean, I'll bring up, Bruce has brought this up at many times during his talks about different traffic, you know, stop signs and requests for things. And I'll bring up the one over where, I can't think of the name of the road. Is it the extension of Zephyr that goes across 2A into
Zephyr goes straight.
Blair, is it Blair?
No, well, no, Zephyr goes from across the whole area of Finney Crossing.
But does it,
from
does
2A
it?
to 2. Blair Park is a whole different road. I
Talking
think.
right where the People's Bank is?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Where,
I know where you're talking.
what street, I can't think of the name of the street, but it goes across and there's that circle back there of residential mixed development. And we took out the stop sign,
Oh,
Yeah.
but that stop sign was there for, I don't know,
Traffic calming.
20 years or something. Well, that didn't follow, I'll bring it up as an example. That was violating the MUTCD guidelines and we were never sued for that. So
Well, maybe no one's gotten in an accident yet.
well, I have to believe that that seems doubtful after that. I don't know, you know,
Yeah,
of
maybe,
course I don't
yeah.
know. But just a thought. But I think it's good to get legal opinion. what is our culpability if we follow PE advice when they haven't really checked best practices or guidelines?
Yeah.
It seems like we need some kind of a check here. I don't know, an independent check or verification or, but I just don't know what that is, so I don't know what to recommend right now.
So it sounds like we want to postpone action on this until we get some legal advice. Yeah, and yes.
Thanks for your comments, very helpful. We'll keep working.
I think it's a good thing, right? I also, in my personal opinion is the speed humps, I would not want them in my development. I just wouldn't, I think it's gonna be, if they're in front of somebody's house, I think they're not gonna like them at the end of the day, but, you know, and I know traffic, what do you call it, traffic policing,
Enforcement?
thank you, enforcement is expensive, but
It's only
you
temporary.
kind of penalize, you kind of penalize all the residents. I think the woman wrote a letter saying it's the same couple people speeding all, well, you gotta fix the problem, because you gotta penalize the other, it's a big development there, the one we're talking about, Brennan Woods. You're gonna penalize 300 households for a few kids, or who knows who's doing it. But anyway,
Indeed. Moving on to town charter hearing notice. Rick, you've written us a memo regarding this.
It's Eric also.
So this is just a small procedural item. We're preparing for the first public, series of public hearings for the town charter revisions. I've warned the first public hearing. Reviewing statute, as I was warning, we need to, and I've posted redlined and language added complete text of the hearing. The charter revisions, rather. Other pieces moving forward, we'll need to publish the hearing in the paper. We'll have other public hearings need to be warned. In order to post a summary in lieu of the redlined version, state statute asks that the board provide a motion for that, for staff to do so. So I'm asking for a motion in the language from state statute to allow a summary of the charter proposal to be posted in lieu of the full redline version of the charter around town.
so we don't see we're not seeing the warning proposed language now, you're just looking for an okay to do it? Will we see it before we approve it? We approve, no?
No, we generally, hearing notices just get published.
In this particular case, to just publish a summary, it required select board action, state and state
How long
statute.
would it be if it's not a summary?
But there would be
Well,
two,
with the charter, whatever, 15, 20 pages.
Yeah, so I've posted that because I needed to meet the warning requirement within the time period specified last week. But thinking moving forward, we'll have to warn this and a couple other potentially, makes it a little more efficient. The board feels that way.
so people will be able to see both the document, the red line document, as well as a summary, which makes it a lot easier to read, for sure.
And this would provide that we could just publish the summary in the newspaper as opposed to the whole thing.
We'll make the red line version available on the website, and of course, copies will be available here at the town hall.
Right.
Yeah, it's been filed with the clerk's office, so it's available for public inspection in the town hall.
Great. Any other kind of notice on that, on the charter? Have you tried any other, I've asked a couple of times about any other, getting more public involvement or feedback.
Well, we can do perhaps a segment on What's Up Williston at some point between now and January.
Have you gotten feedback?
Now in March, the vote would be.
Oh, yeah.
Have you gotten any feedback on that yet?
Yes. Not a lot, but I was at a Rotary Club meeting recently, and 2 or 3 people were talking about it for different reasons.
Good. Great.
I've also tried, I'll promote this more on other communications from Porch Forum, Facebook, Twitter. Some things on Facebook have taken off recently. All depends on the topic too. So cast a wide net on these things is always advisable and see what you get back.
Good, so a motion has been requested, and there's one in the town manager's report.
I'd move that the charter proposal is too long or unwieldy to post in amendment form for town warnings and should therefore be published in summary form.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving on to manager's report.
So, just a quick couple things. Included in your package is the first financial report for the new fiscal year. Doesn't tell you a whole lot, because it is new, but so far, revenues seem to be in line, and the big revenue source is, of course, taxes, and that's consistent with years past. Also somewhat telling is our recreation revenue, because that's largely summer programs, those are largely over at this point. And so, and that was running ahead of schedule. Expenditures are for the police and for the fire department are running a little bit behind, but not anywhere near as much, particularly in police, as they had been in the past, because we're filling these positions now. And in the fire department, we just have one opening. We had hired someone and basically they didn't show. So we had to kind of start over again.
Wow.
Do you know where they went?
Pardon me?
Did you know where they went or what happened?
Not entirely. It's kind of a long story. Anyway, I don't know what the rationale was, but so that's the financial report. Are there any questions on that before I move on? The next item I wanted to touch on is the select board retreat. That is scheduled for Tuesday, October 23rd. We have it, as it stands now, scheduled to start at 5 p.m. So that's an early start time. Other retreats have started even earlier than that. So we were kind of debating whether we should start even earlier, but I'm hoping that 5 o'clock will be reasonable for everyone and allow us enough time to get some work done. The topic, of course, is goals and objectives for the future. And the last several times the board's had those kinds of discussions, the department heads have been invited, so they will be invited to this session as well. And the meeting will be held at the Marriott Courtyard on Hurricane Lane. We're still working on the dinner menu and the facilitator. I had approached one facilitator, Tony Lamb, and he is going to be in Spain on the 23rd. I approached Mr. Dickin, who had worked with us at town meeting several years ago. He is also not available. I think he's in Colorado that week, so I'm still working on it. And I think that's about all I have on that particular issue. Next item I want to touch on is the International City County Management Association are having their annual conference in Baltimore this year, and I will be attending next week. It starts on a Sunday and runs through Wednesday. And then following the conference, I'll be taking a couple days off and visiting relatives in the area. And as I have in the past, I'll provide the board with a written report on the conference. And the new four-way stop is going up shortly on the intersection of Mountain View and Governor Chittenden Roads and North Wilson Road.
He put up nice big signs. I like that.
It's gotten some notice on social media. How many hits do we get on that?
Over 12,000 people looked at it and 200 shared it, so that was one of those things that took off.
I don't know if it's classified as viral, but it certainly had a lot of interest.
So when you say social media, that's,
Town Facebook page. The town Twitter account is still small, trying to get more people to follow it. We're up to 17 people.
And I guess the other final thing is, I'll note is Brian Claffey, Sergeant Claffey, is a sergeant in the police department and has just completed his 20th year of service in the department. So, and he'll be recognized for that. That's all I have for this evening, my manager report.
Under other business, we have a couple of short things and one, probably not too long, but the municipal planning grant. You may have seen it on your emails late today, but if not,
This is from Melinda.
this is from Melinda.
Yep,
Yes. We have it in front of you as well. So, Rick, if you just give us a brief rundown on this.
I'm going to actually turn this over to Matt. I think that's
Oh,
why he's
okay.
maybe hanging around.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I thought I'd stick around just to provide an overview on this. So municipal planning grants is one of the programs available to towns who are looking to engage outside help, get some resources to do that, to achieve one or more of the goals in their town plan. Our staff got together a few months ago and took a look at the planning grant program and took a look at the list of the things the 2016 comprehensive plan says we're going to achieve or try to achieve, and tried to pick a project that we thought matched what was going on. And the one we came up with is a grant to obtain some outside help to really assess the possibility, feasibility, and location of park and ride facilities in Williston that would be locally created and managed. We're hoping to start from a pretty broad base and look for resident preference. Where would, if a park and ride was somewhere, would you use it? Would additional wayfinding help? Would signs just saying, yes, this is a town parking lot, you may park here, help? And then mapping those. So what opportunities are there on nodes where there is also bus service going by nearby or right there? What we're calling mode shift facilities. I go from being in my own car to being in a carpool, or being in my own car to being on the bus, or bike to bus, or walk to bike, all of those things. So not just a parking lot, but what else should be at some of those facilities to enhance all of those different ways that people use to travel. So this fulfills, or will help us fulfill, a goal stated in the comprehensive plan that just states, build a town park and ride. That goal's been in the plan for a very long time. Stems in part from frustration over the loss of the original state park and ride adjacent to exit 12, and also the lengthy timeline running up to the hopefully eventual construction of a new park and ride at exit 12, which last I heard might get started before the end of this calendar year, but I'm guessing it's more like spring of 19 by now. So the grant would be for us to retain some professional help to get that project off the ground, somebody to help us collect the public input, to help us do the mapping, to connect us to best practices around developing those things like that. We need authorization from the select board to allow Rick to be the agent, to allow the planning commission to represent the town, and the staff to manage the grant. And that's what we're requesting tonight, so we can get the application in and see if we can get this project off the ground.
Good, thanks. Any questions for Matt?
The only question is, it's a real brief one I would have with anything along these lines, is we have a pot of money we can draw the town match from.
Yes, so we have some money budgeted in our planning operating budget for miscellaneous planning studies, and we would look to tap that, or look at what this project, as we get a feel for the budget, we may roll that into part of our budget request going forward.
Okay. And the 22,000, which is the maximum we can apply for, will that be sufficient, do you think, or do you think?
I don't think we'll need that much.
Okay. All right, good.
This is a relatively contained project. We're not building anything. We're collecting information and getting it into a report so we can use it
Okay,
to
good.
take some actions in the future.
So we would need a motion to adopt the resolution, if we wish to.
I do have a signed copy from the planning commission chair. So,
I'd move to adopt the fiscal year 2019 municipal resolution for municipal planning grant. Is that sufficient as a motion?
I think so, yeah.
Second?
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion on the motion? Not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And then we have a special events permit to,
Matt?
thanks. Sure. This is for an event scheduled for October 21st. It is scheduled to be held at the Catamount Outdoor Family Center facility, and they will still own it at that point, so. The name of the company that's going to be the licensee is Frost Beer Works LLC.
What's the event?
It's a fundraising event, I believe. It's called Turning Over a New Leaf at Catamount. And it says here that a percentage of the proceeds will be donated back to Catamount. And it's scheduled to run in the afternoon.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
I'm going to abstain because I'm a neighbor.
You're abstaining.
What's that? Yes.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And one abstention, so the motion passes. And we have,
In general, we'll approve all these special events like this.
pretty much,
And the reason for approving something like this, because it's a private,
This is actually, the board is acting as a local liquor control board. And this
We weren't just the select board. We were a liquor control board, just like that. Then we switched
so
right
it
back
was,
to being
it was
select board.
primarily for the beer usage?
Yes.
The beer,
Yes.
Yeah.
okay.
so if things happen in between select board meetings, the board is authorized, the chair, to either approve or disapprove of events that happen in between select board meetings. And I do that occasionally.
Oh, okay.
This happens in every town, right? They have to, yeah.
Yeah. And the last thing is, we have the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is having their town fair coming up in the next month, I believe,
October 3rd.
I believe, at the fairgrounds in Essex, and we have been requested to designate a delegate to the town fair. The recommendation is to designate Deb Beckett as the delegate. Is there a motion to that effect?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Is she on the board?
Yes,
She is.
yes, she is.
Can she be, that's just a question.
As our delegate, sure, yes.
That's appropriate, okay.
Yep,
So you said it was the 3rd?
October 3rd.
October 3rd, and it's actually going to be held at the Doubletree
Oh.
by Hilton in
that's right.
South Burlington this year.
It's
All
also
those in-
on the 4th. It's on the 3rd and the 4th.
Well, the business meeting's on the 3rd.
Yep.
All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The next meeting of the select board is the 2nd of October at 6 o'clock on site at the Chapman Road site at 6 o'clock. Then the board will convene here at 7.
So I had one item I missed under manager's report, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And I'm going to actually ask Eric to do this report.
One of our firefighters, Gabe Cummings, was deployed with the Vermont Urban Search and Rescue Task Force 1 to North Carolina to assist with the Hurricane Florence recovery and rescue this past week. I spoke with Chief Morton today and got an update to share with the board. They've extended the deployment another 4 days, so they expect the task force to arrive back in state this coming Monday morning. They've been actually actively engaged, making many rescues from homes, vehicles, and people who are stranded. Firefighter Cummings, he's been in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. I Googled that this afternoon, and it's off of a bay just off of the Atlantic, inland a little bit. And seeing from the news, they've had devastating flooding down there. So, like with the Hurricane Harvey relief in Houston last year, the Vermont Task Force has received accolades as being a very well-organized, structured, and efficient rescue team. So they're doing good work down there.
This is the second time we've participated in that.
That's good. I mean, we could somehow pass on our appreciation there. Yeah.
Is there any other business to talk about tonight?
Can I ask about the item just before this? This was another schedule. One of the meetings is starting at 6.
Yeah, what's the date on
The second, when we're meeting at 6.
October 2nd.
On the second.
Rick, when you send out that email, would, that announces the meeting, and would you please bold, large letters?
Where are we meeting again? I'm
So
sorry.
we'll meet right at the end of the road, just before you get to the railroad crossing down in North Williston. Just go to the end of the road, we'll meet, there's usually a field to park in down there.
I'm sorry.
You don't know where it is? Chapman Hill?
Chapman Hill.
Chapman Lane.
Chapman Lane.
You're just gonna, it's off of North
I'll
Williston
find,
Road.
I'll find that, yeah.
Just
Just, I
past
kept, I
it.
kept on missing the Chapman Lane piece.
Yeah,
so.
okay,
Just go to the end of the road.
yes. Any other business to talk about tonight? If not, then we're adjourned. Yep.
Chapman Lane, right? 2 questions, sure.